Three, two, and one. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Art of Move podcast with myself, Anthony Manuel, my good friend, Dr. William Rayber. We're out here in the Canadian Rockies trying to find the grand unified theory of human movement, biomechanics, functional fitness, and training. How should we live in this human body of ours and move in this human body of ours? And we are joined today by our friend Jamison Delallo, who has been studying and practicing movement for 10 years. His philosophy is to guide his clients toward optimal pain-free movement and create more daily awareness of their physical body and how they move through space. As one cultivates more awareness, the goal is that this awareness leaks into other areas of their life. More awareness of what they consume, like food, music, and media, who they hang out with, and their habits that don't necessarily serve them. He really enjoys the work that he does and is grateful for all the individuals that have trusted and supported his business over the years. He has worked with humans from all walks of life and loves that he's able to build lasting relationships through his services. Currently working out of his own private studio in South Lake Tahoe, California, also training and teaching classes at Clear Creek Golf Club and Gym Love. You can find him on Instagram at Delallo_methods. And his background is a Bachelor of Science in Kinesiology, over 800 hours of Hatha yoga training, FRCMS, and he's a go-to coach. And we're really, really stoked to talk to him about all the other things that you've personally accomplished athletically, including some of your longer endurance events. Some of the grit that you have in your training has really inspired me personally too, man. Like watching the stuff that you're doing and getting into. I'm just getting into endurance training and endurance sports. And it's really cool to see someone else who's crushing it too. So I always love checking out the content and seeing how consistent you are and the challenges that you put yourself. You did the David Goggins challenge recently too, man. First of all, just thanks for coming on and agreeing to do the podcast with us. It's always great to have these types of conversations, man. But what are you working on right now in terms of your own personal fitness goals, and what's inspiring you lately?
Well, thank you for that intro. Nice to see everyone here. I am currently, right now, I'm on that Recode process still. I've been in the go realm now a couple years. Obviously looking at a bunch of different movement, continuing to learn as I went through my 10 years of studying movement. And now through this go process, it's really got me back in my running. I used to run a lot in high school, did cross country, lived down south in San Diego, was running all the time religiously. Just felt good, love to do it as part of my, stay in shape, fitness, challenging my body. And then kind of fell off of it, got really into the aesthetic bodybuilding side of things, especially when I moved back to the mountains. It snows here a good 6-7 months out of the year. So not really able to train in terms of running year round unless, you get a little crazy and start running in the snow, which again, I've done recently now that I'm getting back into running. But when I came back to Tahoe, there's a good probably 5-6 year stint where I wasn't running, except in the summer, like maybe throwing some sprints here and there, which is funny too, because I'd actually pulled a hamstring. That was like one of my first and only injuries. I pulled a hamstring supersetting deadlifts and sprints out on the track field.
Damn.
But, so just currently recoding, trying to get back into that running shape. And, I think what kind of clicked for me or got me back into it, I ran a marathon a few years back with my mom, who's 65, and she's ran a few Lake Tahoe marathons now, and went to go run a marathon with her. And that's where I realized like something was up. I started running again. Didn't feel the same. First off, taking a break from running, getting back into it is just horrible. The cardiovascular side, the adaptations, being patient with that. But my knee, like I'd never had pain. And that same summer I was training for this marathon. I'd started getting into flag football. So I was cutting on a grass field and I was getting knee pain to the point where only after a few miles of running, I could barely walk down the stairs the next day. And so that that really grabbed my attention. And then just shortly after that marathon, which I ended up completing with very little training, ran in my Vibram toe shoes, all on asphalt, completely broke me for like a week, at least almost 2 weeks. I almost went to the doctor actually because my feet were killing me for a good couple weeks. But yeah, and that's kind of currently where I'm back at, is just recoding, getting back into these runs. I did a long 52K last year that I also did very little training for because of the smoke and the California fires. We actually got evacuated. And then I'm actually currently now a month from another 52K that same race next June.
And then, for our audience, because Will and I know what a Recode is because we've talked about GOTA quite a bit. But from your perspective, when you say Recode, what is it that you are recoding? And for someone who had never heard the term Recode from a GOTA perspective, how do you explain that to them?
So I think of Recode as essentially is just reestablishing, one of our most basic functions, that forward locomotion pattern, running in our gait pattern, seeing, once I saw myself on camera a couple years ago in slow motion, it like I'm still astonished. Like I just love watching movement in slow motion. Obviously I get caught with a lot of Gen Pop people. We all wish we could sit down and study more movement on tape all day, every day, and be absorbed in it. But yeah, once I saw myself on video, I was actually in disbelief that I hadn't already torn something in my, my Achilles or my knee. My landing was terrible. I mean, I was in great shape. I looked good. Like Gilly always says, we have these beautiful bodies, but we're moving like trash. And a lot of us, I thank God I didn't have any sort of catastrophic injury at the joint level or, ligament level at that point. But once I saw that, it was very apparent that, I needed to fix my running patterns. I could feel it in my body. I'm glad I also had that intuition to listen to what my body was saying, not just cover it up or ignore it until something worse happened. And that I found go to when I did. So the recode for me is just reestablishing those basic patterns of forward locomotion, walking, running, jogging, something we should all be able to do as human beings, pain-free, in my opinion. Even as a modern day human, as sedentary as we are, we're still all walking a lot. We're taking a lot of steps throughout the day. So I think having that as a baseline for your fitness is huge. I don't care how much you deadlift. I don't care how big your muscles are. I mean, can we go hike 15 miles with a backpack on and you not be broken the next day, and we can go hit another 15 miles? That's health. That's health to me.
It's a really humbling experience to look at yourself on slow-mo and really see, especially for the first time, reality in front of you. It may not look as good as you think it does, and most often it doesn't, right? So it sounds like you came from similar worlds that Anthony and I. You live in a mountain town. It's snowing 7 months a year. We used to bodybuild, came from pain in that world. How did you bridge between bodybuilding or powerlifting or weightlifting into GOTA? I understand you went from FRC and a couple other systems. What was your path like?
Well, like I said, my background's in kinesiology. Started with that background, cadaver science world. Again, not to like Wex said, not to poo-poo the cadaver science world. I learned a lot. I learned a lot from books. So I went through that. Went through my schooling for a few years. Got very into the bodybuilding. Same as you guys, kind of too. I really got into Ido Portal because once I was in school, this sort of like GOTA brought things full circle too. And I thank God I had the brilliant teachers I had, even through yoga. But even in school, I remember my biomechanics class when we were learning about gait. And even seeing in that class, they were showing the feet straight. It was still a heel strike, midfoot toe off. But I remember walking around after that class, specifically that lecture, and looking at everyone's feet. And I was like, no one's feet are straight. Like everyone's toes are out. And I even started like trying to play with it, like saying like, oh, this almost kind of weird. But I hadn't found GOTA yet at this point either. I wish I had found GOTA. It was around, but they were still like, they were deep in the dark still. And yeah, I remember kind of looking at people's feet. So I always had this voice kind of inside my head, even at that point. I hadn't yet got into crazy amounts of like heavy back squats or deadlifts yet. I was still mainly training purely for aesthetics. And then it wasn't until about a year later I started getting into the heavier deadlifts, the compound movements that are so good for our human physiology and physical health, hitting all the major muscle groups and really getting heavily into that. But I remember even back squatting when I was getting up to the heavier 300-pound weight range, I always had this voice in my head, something like this isn't right. Like loading this much weight always felt unsafe. There's almost like a little bit of fear back times in my head. So I always had this kind of voice of intuition chirping at me. And just always seeing how linear everything was at the gym, regardless. When I first started training, I was always big on moving the spine through all 6 directions. Got into yoga, started going down that route, got into Ido Portal because he was all about movement and, just purely training for aesthetics, being reverse engineering of the body. So that always intrigued me. But yeah, kind of started going down this course where I was digging, where I saw everything in the gym was just too linear. It was like very linear. That's why I got into FRC, started digging into that, really dig the articulations that Dr. Spina was teaching at the time. Always had, was doing good work with my clients. All my clients that come to me, even from the beginning of my journey, I was always dealing with broken bodies. I was never just dealing with healthy athletes or healthy people that wanted to just drop weight and get in shape. It was always some sort of physical. I mean, my first client right out of college, I was rehabbing a shoulder labrum. Lots of people with scoliosis. I got dudes in wheelchairs. One of my big stories is my MMA fighter, Chris Kokoris. He got in a head-on collision, was a week out from one of his biggest amateur fights, was one of the top amateurs in California, lost his girlfriend and dog in the accident, broke his spine, broke his leg, broke his rib, riddled his body with injuries, and was able to rehab him back from that. So I was always able to do good work with what I was doing, but I was always continuing to seek. And, right before I found GOAT, I was actually looking to FP at first because they were doing good work with scoliosis. And I saw that. I was like, how are they getting this good progress? Like, what are they doing? And dug into him. And then I'd actually met David Weck my senior year at State. He came in and did a presentation for his Bosu Ball Elite in one of my classes. So started following him, and I loved how he was getting into all the meridians. He was a little out there, kind of my style. So I was kind of digging into those two, and I actually got blocked by both of them before I'd even found Goda. And then, I forget the basic. I was just asking simple questions, like kind of some of the things that didn't align or make sense to me, and kind of pricking and prying. Then found these Goda guys. This was probably a couple of months after my marathon, and I was still like trying to work out the issues I was feeling with my knee. Got on the phone with Gary Sheff for about an hour. We talked. Got on the phone with Cody for about an hour. We talked. I was like, fuck it, I'm going to go this route. We clicked, went that route. And in terms of bridging the stuff I was learning at the time, it was fun. I remember when I first started learning GOAT, I got some slant boards, and then I started deadlifting on the slant boards. And I'm like, oh, inside ankle bow high, doing deadlifts, and get a message from Gary right away. Don't do this, do that. So yeah, it was. I think the main wake-up call was after being in the GOAT system for a good 6 months before my first lab weekend. Going into the lab weekend and seeing myself on video after I thought I had an idea of what it was I was learning through the modules. And I even just recently pulled this, my assessment up for a client, the assessment that Coach Ricky and them do on you when you get the lab weekend. And man, I was still like pushing 12, 13 degrees into my front chain. It was like unreal just how wound up I was into my front chain. Hips thrusted, thighs rotated out. I mean, I was yogi, I was supple. I could hit the deep paleo squat. I could hinge. Like, I thought I was owning it. And it's fun. You hear Gilly chirping in the background, noticing my right side as I'm just walking through the assessment. He sees my right side's all locked up. But yeah, it's a very humbling experience. And then realizing like, dang, there's a better way to do this. So how all this stuff I was doing, what it has done to my body, and seeing that in slow motion, like the brilliance of that, where this is the stuff like if you're studying movement, like it's great. We can learn stuff from books. Man, I have a whole shelf full of books that I hadn't even read, but then I found Goda and I want to read them. I got like Thomas Myers' book. I got a couple other Spinal Engine. I have Anatomy Trains. I started digging through the muscles and meridians, but as soon as I started watching movement on camera, I was like, no, I need to figure this out, because I'm working with human movement. I'm working with bodies that move. And when I started watching bodies, even just simply walk and sprint through space, you're like, whoa, this is completely different than what I was learning in the books. This is all those rotational aspects that I saw was missing in the gym, that I saw was missing in traditional training. And so that really drew me in. And then as soon as you start to see it, and then after that lab weekend, man, I was going back to every lab weekend after my first one. I think this month was the first lab weekend I haven't been to since my first lab weekend of September of 2020.
Wow. So in terms of Recode work and balancing that out, because you still do quite a bit of endurance training, and you're still doing, like maybe not necessarily barbell lifting, but you still do quite a bit of calisthenics, like push-ups, pull-ups, etc. I see you doing Murph a lot. Do you still do the body weight squats, or do you do a Goda squat variation when you do Murph?
I do my Goda. I do my Goda squats. Try to stick back chain, keep the heels up. And sometimes I'll throw in when I'm doing that. The Murph, I like doing that Murph because the race I'm doing, once you get over, like even into these marathon level races, man, you start talking to some of these guys that get into the ultras, because I'm going to be doing a 60, 72 miler. I had a friend just inviting me up to try to do a real ultra 100-mile race. And that's all mental grit. And that Murph workout, that's where it comes to, you're trying to bust through this thing, your heart level's up, like it's intense. Your mind's telling you stop at certain points. It's not like every Friday when I wake up to do it, I'm like, oh yeah, I got to go do Murph. Like it's fun. It's a challenge. And, I'm always one that firmly believes in that, challenging yourself, especially, this day and age. It's so easy to be comfortable. Like I live in my studio just here. I'm in my house all day. I don't have to drive to work. I get into these stints where I go jump in the cold lake in the winter, And it's more of those things to like, yeah, just keep introducing these uncomfortable factors in the body because it's just too easy to get stagnant these days. And also I'm training for this race is the other aspect of it too. So there's like metaphysical and a physical purpose to my training. But yeah, it's a lot of endurance. I do mix in, like try to play with a little bit, I guess you could say, like bodybuilding mixed in with the GOTA stuff, but really keeping it inside the mat. That's a fun thing about GOTA. You can take a lot of these things. You can make HIIT training, make it inside the mat. You can take yoga, make it inside the mat. That's where, me and a few other coaches are really trying to figure out how to be open armed to everyone, saying like, hey, no, don't do this, do that. But like, hey, how can we show you what it is we're doing over here at GOTA, and how can you apply it to your movement modalities, whether that be yoga, Pilates, bodybuilding, one or the other. I mean, I just had another client come in I haven't seen in about a month, but she came in the other day and we haven't even done any intense work because she was a big, regular fitness girl, but she had terrible sciatica. So I was like, we got to get rid of your pain first. I tell people, we got to stop the bleeding, got to stop everything you're doing, which is the hardest part because you show them this, they see it on video, they understand, but then they got to learn something new. And that's kind of scary for everyone. They love what they know because they can just go in the gym and do it. But once I show them like, hey, there's a different and better way, then they go back and they come back to me like, oh, I'm just so confused when I go to the gym. I'm like, that's good. I want you to be confused. Now we can learn something new. Wipe the slate clean. But she came in, we haven't even done intense work yet. She felt like her glutes have already started to grow. And it's like those cool little things without even trying, just getting her to access the way the body and these muscles are supposed to work with rotational aspects. Like she's getting growth. So it'll be fun to be able to kind of find that group, especially in the bodybuilding world too, where they kind of get turned off from GOTA because, we say not to do certain things, but really show them like, hey, you can take this stuff, integrate it into your bodybuilding and even get, good, if not better results in what you're already doing.
So when you're doing a lot of endurance training, for example, you're doing a lot of running, it can be very time consuming too. And this is something that I'm noticing because I do quite a bit of gait pattern specific work, but then I don't want to spend so much time patterning my gait that I'm not actually like running, right? Like, cause I want to get a couple hours of maybe endurance training in a day. And when you're training for a big race and you're trying to balance that with your Recode work, how do you do that? Do you have shorter Recode sessions? Do you have longer Recode sessions, less often per week? Like, how do you balance your training load with Recode work?
Yeah, that's still something, I'm figuring out myself right now. I'm getting, my longer my weekly miles are, when I get to longer weeks, anywhere from like 45 to 50. I'll probably average like 30 miles a week. But I've even been reading into endurance training and stuff too. I've read a couple marathon training books back in the day. But what I've done too is I'll split up my runs. Like when I have time, for example, this morning I had a little bit of time before class, so I went and got in a couple miles, and then I'll do 4 miles later in the day, as opposed to thinking like, oh, I got to get 10 miles in today and bulk out, a chunk of time to go run 10 miles just because I have clients. I'll find time always in the AM. I'll definitely try to get some sort of run in. I have my Saturday or Sunday, I get my long runs in for this, my longer endurance runs. And then in terms of the Recode work, I'm lucky with my job because I can get Recode reps in, while training my clients and putting them there through their groundwork and rockers, because the groundwork's so powerful. As when I can get reps in like that, I'll get reps in like that. And the Recode's constantly taking place during my life. I mean, I got my best friend that I live with. We're on this, as soon as he was actually in Peru when I was learning this GOTA stuff. He came back from a very spiritual journey doing medicine. He comes back talking about spirals, in the esoteric world. And I'm talking about all this movement of spirals with GOTA. He's like, what the fuck? This is all so similar. We got rid of the couches. There's no chairs. We're cutting our dining room table this year. So it's, getting those lifestyle reps in is where the Recode's coming in. And then I've gotten to the point where I was very strict and oh, I need to get some Recode reps before I run. But I'll get up and go run now, especially with how my body's feeling better and more fluid with my patterning. I mean, I still got a long ways to go. And like Gilly was saying in the podcast for you guys too, we're living in the modern world. We're still constantly coding in, negative adaptations that we want to scrub out. And even, me living the lifestyle as best I can, even with, like Coach Bam, who's another one of my good homies, we're still, there's times where, you're in a chair, you're in a plane, you're in a car. It's hard to escape the WOTA inputs, man, in this modern life.
If I was to ramp up my running, right? And it's similar to what Anthony asked, but let's say I go out running, my bottom of my feet becomes sore. The outside edge actually becomes sore just because it's getting more work and it's not used to it. I find that happens with GOTA. How do you marry that with the longer runs? Because I'm sure you feel repetitive pains in certain areas. Is it just Recode work, or do you have tricks for that with increasing your distances?
Yeah, man. So when I first found GOTA, and I started doing this Recode work, I remember I felt like my calves were gonna implode. I'd start doing runs, and my calf would feel like it was seizing up. So it'd be literally I'd be starting my runs, um, and I hadn't built my endurance back up even to running shape. This was after I'd done that marathon. I recovered from the Recode work, and then being the active people we are, we want to go take this shit for a spin right away. And it's like
Yeah.
you got to build up that endurance side, and that is something we got to be patient with. I just went through it with my best friend who's never been a runner. I'm recoding him, and he's also trying to build up through this endurance to train for the race. And things come up in the outer edge of the feet, and then it's like, hey, let's see what's going on. Oh, you're aggressively now supinating to that outside edge. Your head's getting out the column, so you're beating up that outside edge of the foot. So not only are we using these new tissues, sometimes we get a little over aggressive inside that mat too, and we could push it a little bit too far. But to answer your question, yeah, I definitely felt that myself. Went through a lot of calf tightness at first. In terms of other like musculature that necessarily felt tight, I wouldn't say me personally, but I've dealt with clients that get the hip kind of acting up a little bit or the low back, and I always go into just more like passive stretching, passive release. I love using foam rollers, lacrosse balls, all those kind of things. I do it more as a way to I just say stimulate the tissue. I don't understand necessarily what's going on 100% when we are, rehydrating the tissues or doing the myofascial release. I just know through my experience, it's helped me personally and it helps clients. So I'll mix that in, lots of passive decompression. I mean, that's something I've gotten way back into heavily. Like, you get really into GOTA, you want to do all the cool stuff, you want to get into the new movements, but man, the basics is where it's at, man. Getting on the groundwork, the rockers, the passive stretching, the passive decompression, getting on your backs, A-frame legs on a chair, man. After every run, I try to hit that for at least 10 minutes because you're hot and you just get those femurs to melt more into the back chain. You let that spine decompress. And again, depending on the age and the people's background, this is a variable that kind of differs for everyone. But in general, when I have some of my clients that are going through those discomforts, it's like, hey, tone it back a little bit. I know we want to jump into the endurance. In some cases we can't. I'm training a guy right now. Came to me as a triathlete, and or not a triathlete, but he's gonna be doing his first triathlon, having knee pain, having IT band pain. He's only 3 months out from the race though, so it's like, okay, we only have so many options. I got to fix your landing because you're landing like shit. That's why your IT band and knee are hurting. But you start running, things might start acting up. We're gonna have to, it's an audible. It's a person by person, individualized thing where I just take it with the client at a time. But those little basic things, some myofascial release, some stretching, Epsom salt baths are amazing. I love doing, work with the Theracane because I still have some tightness into my calves. I'd say out of all my issues when I get into my longer runs, I still have a little bit of calf tightness. But that's something I've been working out on my own, getting in the Epsom salt bath, massaging my own calves, massaging my feet, and doing things right after my run too, especially the decompression work.
Do you find that when you're running the longer distances, it's harder for you to stay in the math? It's harder for you to express the GOTA patterns? Or do you feel like the repetition and the nervous system inputs are enough such that when you exhaust yourself, you default even further into the math?
Again, it's building endurance. I think we can build those patterns up and see them, get them into our sprint, get them into these shorter mileages of running. But it's just like, building the endurance of the muscle. We need to build the endurance of the pattern too, at least from my experience so far. But like, again, I'm still, going through my own recode process. And I mean, there's times even into my longer runs, though, I'll be deep into my miles and I'll hit a groove where I'm like, I'm feeling fluid. I'm feeling like I'm moving better. I'm feeling like I'm landing better. And then there's times where I feel like I lose it and get a little more sloppy. Um, but yeah, I think it's just with time training that endurance too. And that's again, it's not every day where we doing these super long runs or we all training endurance. So it kind of just depends what it is you're training for. And if you are training for those endurance runs, it's just sticking with the lifestyle Recode reps, doing your groundwork daily, doing the decompression, and then just building it into your runs as you increase your miles.
Nice.
Yeah, definitely. I find similar with that. Sometimes I'm on a run, I'm an hour in, and I'll start hitting better strides. I don't always lose the patterns if I've been running for a long time, right? So what is your go-to movement?
Something I've been really jiving with lately is, again, just basic ground rockers. I've been strapping that yoga belt around the knees and just getting on the ground, working with really slow controlled rockers, tensioning into that strap with the knees out, really trying to find fire a back chain, doing a lot of even isometric holds from that 4-point position on your knees, and really digging into that back chain, doing unsupported rockers with the hands up. I was messing with something today that felt really good before I went on my run. I was messing with the landmine squats, and I was just doing the iso holds, and I did a few rounds of a couple minute iso holds, just shaken to failure. And when I got into my run right afterwards, it felt amazing. Those are those little tricks too. When I find those movements where it really translates into my run, and I feel that back chain firing. Those are things I'm going to grill in more. So like feeling that today, I'm gonna definitely grind into more of like messing with the landmine squat and the landmine iso holds. But right now, it's just sticking on the ground, messing with like groundwork, really deepening into that back chain, mixing in some of like Eric Goodman's decompression work, but again, keeping it more inside the go to math. I like doing that kind of stuff too right now. But drop-ins are definitely, I've been messing with all types of drop-ins variations, rear foot elevated iso holds with the plate, and then burning out with reps. And then last time I was at the GLS facility over lab weekend too, we were doing a lot of, we did this 12-minute, Gary always he gets me way back into the math. I think I'm doing good. And then I get another coach's hands on me and they just get me back into it. But we were doing these 12-minute circuits of where it literally sit in the bow air chair on the wall. And then for 12 minutes straight, you're holding that bow air chair and you're just going back and forth from one leg to the other, back and forth, holding like a single leg iso like drop in air chair, and doing that for 12 minutes, just burning through it. So I've been utilizing that as well too.
One thing that I wanted to ask you too, because I noticed you have 800 hours of hatha yoga training, and you've probably done a lot of yoga. I did a lot of Ashtanga yoga, and probably had about 5 years of 2 years where I did nothing but yoga, but then also 5 years where it was kind of in and out of my practice. But I wanted to ask you specifically, because I have a lot of friends who are yogis who incidentally get into running because they feel like that, yoga is great, but it's not enough for their fitness. So they start running. But I've noticed that yoga does affect your running mechanics. And from your perspective, as not only someone who has, practiced a lot of yoga, done a lot of yoga teacher training, and now is also studying the mechanics of running through Goda, with your kin degree and everything, what do you notice yoga, like let's use hatha yoga as the example because that's what you have the most training in. How does that affect your posture, your running mechanics, and what can yogis do, other than giving up yoga, because presumably they love it, they're passionate about it. Other than giving up yoga, what can yogis do to start, regaining some of the stuff that they might be hurting through their yoga practice?
So I kind of lost you there at the beginning, but if I heard the rest of it correctly, just kind of what yogis can do to kind of implement this, or do a better practice, implementing patterns that don't necessarily hurt their forward locomotion.
Mm-hmm.
Well, first, I'm lucky. I had a very brilliant yoga teacher. She actually, she taught back chain without the same lingo as Goda does. She taught back chain dominance, but it wasn't something I noticed too. Was it wasn't ever taught and beaten to the head where, when we teach, for example, when she teaches Tadasana, which is mountain pose, she teaches back chain, getting the butt back, thighs rotating in. It was never taught to carry that outside of the class. That's another thing I loved about Goda was we talk about columns, we talk about back chain dominance, we teach you about this standing posture, but then we also try to beat in your head like, man, you've got to think about that throughout the day. You've got to catch yourself with your toes out. You got to get your feet straight, inside ankle bone, high back chain dominance, inside the columns. Like you got to grill that into your head. That's the one thing I loved about Goda too, because I'm one of these dudes that's big about this practice of awareness, and now it's taking that physical practice of awareness into your every minute of your life. to where you pay attention to when you're standing, when you're walking, when you're, if you catch yourself in the chair and you can get on the floor, get on the floor. But yeah, I had a very brilliant teacher, and she was very steeped in the philosophical side, but she was very brilliant with the body as well. And we kind of, we don't get in arguments, but I'll go back for classes and I won't input certain movements. I won't turn my foot out. I'll try to corner my back foot. I've had discussions with Bam about this because he's the same way. And it's with yogis, it's funny because I would love to get some of the top yogis on video running to really see how yoga has impacted their forward locomotive patterns. And there are a lot of yogis we talk to that do have pain in their body. They're not totally pain free, but at the same time, a lot of yoga that's taught in the States is, as my teacher says, less people should be doing yoga and less people should be teaching it, because it's actually causing a lot more harm than good, as it is, we could see across the board with a lot of the stuff going on in the fitness industry. And I don't want to say anyone's doing right or wrong, because we're all learning. It's all imperfect knowledge, essentially. We're all at this place where hopefully we're trying to seek to do better. But yeah, it would just be like paying attention to those simple things, not allowing us to thrust forward, really paying attention to that outside edge of the foot, keeping the inside ankle bone high in a lot of the postures. I think there is a place for yoga, and it can be practiced with intent and awareness. But again, it's a non-locomotive practice. We're holding isometric postures that have really nothing to do with forward locomotion. There is, when you get into brilliance of teaching the movement of energy in the body, of prana, of these spirals of movements going on within the body, one bone moving this way, one bone spinning the opposite, all the way up the body type thing. But it is a non-locomotive practice, and you are holding these isometric patterns, which do impact, how you move forward through space on the daily. So I think if you can integrate that and have, your awareness of paying attention to certain movements within your yoga practice, and then have that awareness of what to pay attention to throughout the day. Because again, I was messing with my sister the other day. We did a bunch of, I was in her class, and she did a bunch of brilliant stuff for opening up the round shoulders, really brilliant. But I'm watching everyone's feet in class, and everyone's toed out, inside ankle bone low, and they walk out like that too. So it's, just that little brilliance of being able to tell someone to pay attention to these cues outside of class, or getting them into this beautiful Tadasana mountain posture, standing in their back chain with good columns and feet, and then be like, hey, you feel this, take this with you outside of class. Take this with you when you're standing in line at the grocery store. Take this with you when you're standing at your kitchen sink. It can have such a bigger impact in our class. That's where it's, Go has totally flipped my mind on movement too, where we're focused at our hour of that we're in the gym, the hour of Pilates, the hour of that yoga, wherever we're doing. But that's like just such a small percentage of your day. If you could flip that awareness now, yeah, still have that awareness in class, but bring that awareness to the other, waking hours of your day. Like, it's absolute brilliance what it can do for the body. I have people that see me for one session. I show them themselves on video. They see how their posture is bad and what's causing their pain, and they won't see me anymore. But I'll chime in and check in with them later. I'll be like, hey, how's your body feeling? Have you kept up with any of the little simple movements I showed you? Oh, no, but I've been walking how you told me, and I've been standing, and my hip feels a lot better. So, just to give someone that power back is, man, it's amazing.
Decompression work with what you were talking about before. Eric Goodman, I believe, is who you referenced. Could you go through for the audience what decompression is to you and how you do it?
Yeah, so when I see decompression, I'll go back to my body. When I saw my assessment video, I pulled that back up, like a few months ago. The body being thrown in the front chain like that, Nadi talks about this in FP, right? Gravity's never turned off. Gravity's constantly compressing down onto your body. That's not an option to turn that on or off. So if you're living in that front chain, hips thrusted forward, feet turned out, dumping to the inside edge of that ankle bone, man, that gravity is just compressing all of that energy into your joint capsules. Your ankles are getting stuck, glued to the inside ankle bone, glued to the floor. Your hips are starting to chirp at you, low back, SI, all the way up in your shoulders and neck. So you can think of that decompression as if, you're standing in that front chain posture, hips in front of the ribs, and someone just presses down on your head. All that pressure is going to go into the joint capsules. Now when we get in that proper stance, straight foot inside, ankle bone high, butt back behind the ribs, and you try to compress the system, now we're going to be loading it into the musculature more so, to where it should be, not into all those joint capsules. But again, this is where it's a twofold thing, right? We can't just go standing with our butt back, straight foot inside, ankle bone high, and everything's gravy. You still were living in that position for X amount of years, whether you're a 25-year-old, 35-year-old, 45-year-old, 50-year-old. The older you are, the longer you've been living in that compressed state, the longer we got to decompress and pull that compression out of the system. So if you've been standing that front chain for 40 years, man, we better pay attention to your daily patterns. We better start getting you on the floor, but we got to decompress you. Otherwise, we ain't going to get anywhere. It's not just simply getting the inside ankle bones high and the butt back behind the rib cage. You got to get compression out of this system, especially with the older people. The younger adults, the teenagers, these younger athletes. I'm not going to say it's easier to recode them, but depending on how bad their assessment is, it's a little bit easier because they haven't been compressed for years. Yeah, they've been living in the chair since 4, which we all have. We've been wearing shoes since we were about 1 or 2 years old, which we all have. So those are the two main culprits. But the longer you've been sinking into that front chain compressed state, the longer it's going to be where we got to really start pulling that compression out. And you can think about one of the simplest forms, like I said, some passive decompression on the back. You're standing up, you have that compression into the spine, hips thrusted forward. Now I just get you laying on your back, your legs up in that A-frame position. Now we have gravity pressing onto the spine, kind of lengthening everything out, letting gravity sink those femurs back into the hip capsule. I mean, Gilly talked about he was doing that stuff for 2 hours a night for about 2 or 3 years. He got those prism glasses, would sit and read and watch movies for 2 hours on his back every night just to get out of his pain he was in. So you can see it, depending on how bad your body is, how compressed you are, how WOTA you are, or suboptimal. But depending on how far you went backwards, the more decompression, the better. I mean, anyone over their 30s that's been living in their front chain forever, you can't do enough decompression. And especially because we're still sitting in chairs, we're still sitting in cars, we're still sitting in airplanes. That's constant front chain compressed state, because no one's going to be, even when you're sitting perfect, right? We have people that are at desks and they're like, oh, well, I can stand up at my desk all day. Well, standing up 8 hours in one spot ain't natural either. Just as sitting down in your chair ain't natural. Yeah, you could sit right, you could sit upright, you can get on your sit bones, but you're still sitting at 90-degree angles. So you can never do enough decompression, and that's where the passive one's good. And then we can get into those active decompressions, which is where I get where I mentioned Eric Goodman. I like using a lot of his more like active decompression, whether that be on the ground in a prone or supine position, or even standing on 2 feet.
What is the process for decompression? Is there a breathing that you use? Is it just laying in certain positions and allowing the system to not basically is not being in a compressive position naturally decompressive, or is there something that you're actively doing? I was just asking, is there an active element to decompression, something like a breathing technique? Are you moving at all during decompression, or is it just finding places, positions where you are not naturally compressed, and then by virtue of that, you're ending up decompressing because you're not in a compressive state, or is there an active element to it?
Doing the active stuff. Again, this is going to vary individual to individual. If I have someone that's super compressed, maybe doing some active decompression might trigger someone, might not feel as good at first. And there's a learning curve to some of these things too with Eric Goodman's work. As much as I like it, it takes a couple sessions before clients, it kind of like clicks, like, oh, I get what we're doing. Like I feel that sensation of the active decompression. So as opposed to like thinking of like hanging upside down in some moon boots, right? Or like one of those decompression tables where you're just upside down and it's like super passive. That could be good at up to a certain point. We don't want everything to always be passive. So adding that active component to it too, I think like with GOTA, when it comes to some of these skill sets of understanding the shapes, right? You see the shapes at first, and then it's, the see-feel technology we talk about. Oh, I see that bow, and then it's like, oh, I feel that bow into my system. It feels safe. It feels secure. It's the same thing with, actively decompressing, but also like feeling that compression in the system, right? As we're loading through space, we talk a lot about we're not driving force through the ground. We're absorbing energy and force into the body, and doing that in kind of a correct way. It's almost like another skill set as we move up, like the pyramid of all of our GOTA stuff. I don't know if that exactly answered your question, but
no, it definitely does. It definitely does.
Yeah, I had a question about FRC and if you do any functional range conditioning movements with your clients. I know personally I do functional range conditioning at the very start, just to get them to feel certain parts of their spine, because I find it to be very easy to do, and I can do it in 10 to 15 minutes. Is there any aspect of functional range conditioning, which I would say for the audience is just moving parts of your body on purpose? I would say more or less linear. Is there anything you do along those lines for your clients or for yourself?
Yeah, that system, if I have someone come to me that is very, not kinesthetically intelligent at all, coming back to some of the controlled articulations is a good place to start. Because sometimes it's funny how I can try to train a drop into someone and they can get it right away, or I can try to train in someone that's totally like foreign and it's like too much for them. So yeah, basic. I mean, I haven't done them in a while with clients. More recently, some of the stuff I can think of is spine stuff, doing more like kind of segmented lumbar movements. Because I'm a big dude. If someone comes to me with pain or discomfort in a certain area, I just want to bring movement to that area, whatever movement we can bring without causing discomfort, and then try to increase that from there. And then if I need to send them to, a chiropractor, specialist, manual therapist, or something like that, I can do so. But for the most part, I tend to find by just bringing movement to an area that is bugging someone, usually it's either there's trauma there, right? Whether it be physical, emotional, whatever kind of trauma they're holding or tension they're holding there. And starting by bringing movement is like kind of a brilliant way to start tapping into it and then kind of progress from there. But yeah, even myself, I was messing with some of the segmented cat cows and stuff the other day, just messing with that movement in my spine because I just like moving different ways. But it's definitely not as regular as when I just had FRC before GOTA, where I was like, okay, this is super brilliant. I'm using all the controlled articulations for each and every client. I'm sure if I had someone with some crazy hip stuff where for some reason they couldn't get into a drop in or a rocker, maybe trying some like side lying hip articulations or something. But again, it's like case by case, like just depends what the person is feeling, how kinesthetically aware they are. And I might throw those into the mix. It's in my toolbox. And if I need to pull them out to use them, I'll use them.
I'm really curious about some of the experiences in how different movement practices affected you psychospiritually as well, because I know in my personal experience, I experienced a profound shift in my whole personality and my personal energy with the few years of yoga practice. And depending on what movement practice I was engaged in, my psychophysical energy and my psychospiritual energies really were impacted. And I'm just curious, as someone who practiced a lot of yoga and moving basically into doing mostly Recode work in GOTA, did you experience any psychospiritual shifts, shifting into GOTA specifically?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that attracted me to GOTA as well was this nature aspect, this natural aspect. Gilly always talking about Fibonacci and fractals and spirals, and I'm like, oh, this is the shit I'm into. Fucking like seedlings spiraling out of the ground and the Fibonacci sequence. Going back to yoga real quick, I had a very my teacher is also my sister who's been practicing and studying yoga for over 20 years, and she's super brilliant. She has a great lineage of teachers that she comes from, but she's very steeped in the philosophical side, the 8-limb system, which is for me, when I tell people I did yoga, yoga was more of a very much a self-study for me, and yoga is a great tool for that. They give you this eight-limb system of the asana, the physical practice. You have the pranayama, you have things like brahmacharya, talking about your sexual energy, like these 8 different limbs that are very brilliant to study. And before even finding GOTA, I learned these sitting postures in yoga. I was thrown into our Seiza position, what's known in yoga as Vajrasana, or lightning bolt pose. I mean, I have to sit in that posture for a good hour my first day of class, and I'd be elevated, my hips up. I'd have blankets under my knees because at that time I was lifting a lot too, so I couldn't get down fully into that posture. So physically, it helped a lot. But then, yeah, in terms of GOTA, yeah, it's really weird. I remember the first like 6 months of recoding. I don't know if it's just me and like learning the movements and getting this spiral of energy back in the body, but I could have swore at night I was like tornadoing in my bed. I'd wake up and my like blankets would be all twisted around my feet and stuff. But in terms of like a kind of spiritual so-called awakening. I think it might have just deepened it more, might have maybe brought me back into it because, we just gotten out of, we were in the beginning of the pandemic towards the end of the years when I jumped into GOTA. I got pulled out of a lot of my daily personal practices when I probably should have been, steeped in them more so. But during that time, I got out of my daily meditation practice. I got out of my jumping into the lake practice, and coming into GOTA and meeting other coaches like BAM and seeing that the GOTA realm is full of these other people that are into all these different, so-called outside or kind of like hippie spiritual practices of jumping in the cold water, doing breath work, messing with these things or kind of tapping into more of the spiritual side. It definitely honed me back in, I think, as I was kind of distancing myself from those things. But it kind of was a great reminder as I got back in, being with these great group of coaches and stuff like that. So I would definitely say, I don't know if it deepened it, but it definitely reminded me of, to get back into those practices and not to lose sight of them. And like I said, it connected a lot of things because it brought everything full circle from when I first saw that video in college of, the walking mechanics, and then kind of forgot all about gait, had brilliant teachers along the way, and then got to GOTA and almost like kind of connected all these dots of college, yoga, FRC, and then finding GOTA. It kind of really connected everything for me.
In terms of your own internal cueing within your own body, is there a cue that you wish you could tell other people? Like for me, it's understanding the spirals. I feel like I understand the spirals deep level. Is there something within you that you're like, okay, I wish I could show somebody how simple this is? I feel it.
Yeah, man, it's like that. I just think of the spinal movement. I just think of how, like, the main thing I see when I see a lot of people, obviously, is like internal cueing. If I could tell people to think about stuff, and it's hard because you don't want people to overthink this shit too. We can get really caught up and too heady in it to where you're running and you're thinking, oh, I got a bow, I got a corner, a straight foot, this side, I can bow high, my butt back. And if I could tell people anything, it's landing on that outside edge of the foot, keeping the feet straight, keeping the butt back. But I building people's spinal fluidity back, man. It's just been completely lost. We've all been in this chair, hunched over since we were a few years old. And it's just crazy seeing these patterns that are thrown into the body. And then we go into the gym and we fucking double down and throw more of it into the body, more hip thrust, more front chain, more bracing of the core, more stiff spine. Like, people come see me and their spine just like, it's stuck. And so, like, my first thing is like, let's get your spine moving, whether it's just like holding some passive, like child pose, like reaching lateral positions, or, simple little twists. And then like that next step being like, okay, let's feel that fluidity. Like there's literally fluid in your spine. You have cerebral spinal fluid going up that thing. So like reawakening that. And I think I like doing that because it awakens and gets this energy, like, getting more into the esoteric spiritual stuff from like yoga, like this prana, this chi, this stuff that just gets stuck down at these lower levels because we're hunched over all day. Like really getting that to start to actually like move around, and the brilliance that's on the spine. So telling people like, yeah, find that fluidity in the spine, wake that snake up. It's really just getting that spine to move, and how good people feel too. Like when you first getting the spine to move, and like just reawakening that, it's really beneficial for people in a lot of different manners. Again, that since being in GOTA, like I said, I was already doing good work before. I was getting progress with all my clients, but since being in GOTA, amazing all the different messages you get. Makes you feel that good, because as movement coaches and stuff too, for the most part, I think a lot of us are in it to really help and be of service to people. And there's some of us that are really into it, continuing to seek knowledge and affect what it is we're doing, and making people feel better. But man, I get whether it's my older clients, their hips feeling better, or older client the other day saying, oh, my friend said I look taller. Oh, good, we're getting decompression out. We're decompressing. You're getting longer. You're getting taller. One of my basketball players, he plays on 3-on-3. He was just at a USA Red Bull tournament, and he came to me at 25 with like tremendous knee, hip, and back pain. Showed him on camera. He's at physical therapy for years. Like, no one ever looked at how I was standing. Like, no, that's the craziest part too. When you first show someone on camera and you start talking about like their stand, no one's told me about my feet. No one's told me about how I stand. And it's like, it's that simple to where you start putting those things in, man. And he just messaged me the other day. We haven't even gone into any like crazy up level performance type of work yet. But he's like, dude, this is like a cheat code. He messaged me the other day.
Most people don't realize how much you can get with just behavioral changes. Like the mentality was really hard for me to wrap my head around, because I always felt gains came from intensity and, like progressive overload and exceeding past what you previously were capable of. But then, implementing it was honestly mostly the behavioral changes, the implementation of the behavioral changes that really, really impacted me the most, standing in my back chain, standing in my columns, and not having that, my duck-footed wide sumo deadlift pattern show up in my standing posture, right? And those things, the idea of stopping the bleeding is a hugely powerful concept that a lot of people can't wrap their head around. Like, you can gain by doing less of the shit that's messing you up. That's something that's really, really hard to wrap your head around. Did you experience any internal resistance around that? Removal of any, like, obviously you said you were deadlifting on slant boards and everything, so you were still trying to get the gains while you were GOTA. But was there any, like, different question, do you ever have an athlete that comes to you that's like, no, but I want to lift, and you're like, well, it's jacking you up? Is there anything that you would do to kind of like show or demonstrate to a person that what they're doing is screwing them up? How do you create buy-in on that?
So, in terms of the few athletes, luckily I haven't gotten a lot of resistance, from people. I'm not in this game too either to have to convince anyone.
Yeah.
If you're coming to work with me, you're paying me for my time, and we're using each other's time. So you came to me for a reason. You're either referred to me or you see the work I'm doing and you like it. So I would hope you're going to listen to what I say. And usually the people that listen to what I say and put in the work, they get really good results. They feel better. And it's hard to stop that bleeding. I had my friend, one of my best friend's wives here in town. She came and saw me. She was pulling her calf every time she would go and sprint. She was starting to get like terrible sciatica. And this is a bodybuilder. She did fitness shows, very, beautiful aesthetic body, beautiful glutes, but standing in a front chain. All of the people she had worked with prior to, doctors, massage therapists, they told her she had loose ankles. I was like, what does that mean? You have loose ankles? That's what their explanation was for you getting hurt. But it's hard. But I told her, I was like, you got to stop it. Like, obviously, whatever you're doing has led to this. I don't know which part of it is that has led to this, but let's stop everything you're doing. And I know, and it's hard for some people. Some people can't. I was working with a local chiropractor in town. She couldn't stop doing what she was doing until finally she's like, oh yeah, I know what's fucking me up. It's the lifting I'm doing with my other trainer. And so she finally decided to stop. And what do you know, like a month into it, after stopping, even though she wants to work out, she keeps telling me like, can you give me a workout to do? I just want to go in the gym and be able to do something on my own. And it's like, yeah, it's hard to tell people to pump the brakes because we're just addicted to, like, first off, we need to know, and we think we know, but we don't really know. Even now we can say we know, but we don't really know. And it's letting go of those attachments and those ideas and being able to pump the brakes. Like, again, we live in a society too where you don't feel like you've done something at the gym unless you're like pouring sweat and panting hella hard, when probably that's the last thing most people need to do. Is add a crazy other physical stress into the body when they're already like mentally, emotionally, and environmentally stressed out as it is. They need to like pump the brakes and like, hey, get on the ground. Like this is what you need right now. Trust me, just trust me. And I'm lucky. I think the most resistance I had was from my local chiropractor I was working with. But now, she's bought in, she's feeling better. She's understanding the system. But yeah, I tell most people, it's like, hey, whatever you've been doing is what got you here. It's what got you knocking at my door. That knee pain you got, that hip pain you got, whatever you were doing is what has caused that. And I'm glad, because the other thing too, I tell people, I was like, you're listening to your body though. Like, I recently had a 28-year-old come to me that's been going to physical therapy for a year, has had no success with his sciatica. But he just kept thinking like the stuff they were teaching was like, this just doesn't seem right. And then he finally reached out to me, and I'm helping him a lot and helping him progress forward to where these are the last 2 weeks where he hasn't had any back or sciatica pain, and he's running again. He just messaged me the other day. He's like, dude, I ran downhill the other day, just kind of like to run because I was running with my dog. And he's like, I thought my knees and shit were gonna hurt, but he's like, I felt really good afterwards. So it's trippy, man. We had a CrossFit gym here in town where the physical therapy office literally moved into the gym for a good 6 months. And it's like no one's plugging two and two together. Like what I'm doing, I'm told to do it first off because it's supposed to be physically good for me and help me, but yet like I'm always sore. I'm always in joint pain. And then they go get fixed up at the physical therapy office. And whether it was like a deadlift or an overhead press or whatever it is that blew out something in their body, they get it rehab and they go right back to what it was that hurt them. It's just like our human mind is kind of weird how it works, you know. It's trippy seeing it in real time. I have seen where they're trying to get friends to come see me and their friends are super resistant. But I haven't personally yet had to deal with someone that's heavily resisted it. Because again, I'm not one to try to convince you if you don't want to hear what I have to say. I've got plenty of work, I've got plenty of business, and I'm at a point where the clients are going to come to me regardless. I don't need to go out and convince people. I'll just share my work and do my best to educate from where I'm currently at. And hopefully, you know, that continues to keep on attracting, you know, people and relationships into my life, even stuff like this, because, you know, that's what's important.
People want to find more out about your work, or they want to work with you, or they want to just connect with you. What's the best place for them to find you online?
Probably just through my social media right now. Delallo_methods on Instagram. I'm on Facebook as well, Jamison Delallo. That's Jamison with an I. But yeah, just keep an eye out. I'm looking to build and scale my online side of business things, just tap into that world a little bit deeper. I'm always going to continue to work with people in person. That's my jam. I love getting my hands on people. Like I said, love building these relationships. This is my gift and service this lifetime to the world, and I'm super grateful for it. I'm grateful for all my teachers, grateful for platforms like this and you guys, where we're able to share and discuss these things and be open-minded and you know, continue to explore movement.
100%, man. Well, thank you again for coming on. This was the Art of Move, guys. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for watching. If you're listening on YouTube, please hit the subscribe button, give us a little like and a comment. It really helps the algorithm. If you're listening on Spotify or iTunes, leave us a rating or a review. That also really, really helps. If you're watching on No Filter, thanks for watching on No Filter. We love doing it live. We'll catch you on the next episode, guys, and thanks again for listening.
Have a good one, guys.